This is Akashwani Chennai.
Good evening, listeners. We bring to you an interview with Sri B. Jagannath, advocate and author of the first native voice of Madras, GAZULU LAKSHMI NARASU CHETTY. Hello, Mr. Jagannath. We welcome you very warmly to our studios, and we're very happy to have you here because it's like a kind of a new enlightenment we've had after reading your book, The First Native Voice of Madras. So when I wanted to start off, we keep talking about unsung heroes in the Indian history and other things. How did you even get to know about Lakshmi Narasu Chetty? What inspired you to read more about him, get details about him, and do this entire book?
Thank you so much for having me in All India Radio, ma'am. It's a pleasure to be over here. Since you have said about the unsung heroes, we are going to celebrate our 77th Independence Day on August 15th. We owe all our freedom to our freedom fighters. The breath of independence that we are having right now, exactly. We owe that to our freedom fighters. If not for their fight, we wouldn't be having this kind of, freedom to even talk about him in this scenario. So I would like to thank All India Radio for calling me at this juncture for this interview. With regard to how I came to know about GAZULU Lakshmi Narasu Chetty, in fact, it's a very interesting story. If you see the entire history books, there's complete a blackout about him. There's no mention about him in history books, except for in one place with regard to the Torture Commission. Only in one place, if you see with regard to the Torture Commission, there's just a very passing remark that with regard to UPSC, when you prepare, those students alone will know with regard to the Torture Commission. But if you see from where I got to know about this, I was preparing a case in the Madras High Court. During the research of that case, I came to know certain events which took place pertaining to education in Madras. Now, at that point of time only I came to know, because these documents are not available with us over here. First, I came to know of that when I was searching for the information what I wanted from the British Library in London. It was from that information which led me to the existence of this person called GAZULU Lakshmi Narasu Chetty. Till such point of time, even I didn't have any idea of this person ever being in existence.
True.
That is how the ecosystem has worked to ensure that the person's existence has been erased from a memory. Like I said, there's been a total blackout about this person. So the moment I got to know about that person and his contributions to education, I thought that we have to do some research about him. When I started doing research about him, it was like, digging a gold mine.
Okay.
Basically, as an author or as a researcher, when you start doing research, when you get more and more and more research about a person, when you have voluminous materials, something which nobody else has said in this country previously to this scale and magnitude in which we have published in the book, that is how we came to know about GAZULU Lakshmi Narasu Chetty for the first time, because I was researching for a case from which I came to know the existence of this person, and slowly, the very limited time which was available with me despite court hours, I researched about him, and then I had met Mr. Kumaresan of Center for South Indian Studies, who had encouraged me to write this book, and here I'm taking this interview in front of you, thanks to all the efforts and God's willing and God's grace.
I have to mention that the research work, the amount of research you've put into it, huge is just not the word. I should say it's humongous. And, I'm very sure that you would have had a lot of challenges in getting every single document you've had. How does this book, sir, reinforce the prevailing narratives about 19th century India, especially the impact of British colonial rule that we've had?
Well, in fact, the narratives which has been there, which show that it is the benevolence of the British that we got all these things, we got the education. It is because of the British that we got, the English language that we are speaking right now. Because it was only because the British gave us the English language, we are speaking English language right now. Even this interview is in English only, incidentally. It's because of the British that we got the education system. All these kind of things. These kind of narratives, with due respect, there were good British people. I have a separate chapter in my book called as A Few Good Englishmen. But despite that, I have to say that the narratives which has been there has been suited specifically to show the British in a very good manner, which is wrong. Because if you see what has happened, if you see the truth what has happened from a different perspective, see, there are two perspectives where you can see two sides of a coin. One is convex and the other side is concave.
Yeah.
If you see in that perspective, the British have been good. I'm not saying no. But have they been the best? The answer is no. Whether we have been treated as equal citizens, the answer is definitely no. And whether there were certain British people who were white British people who supported us, the answer is yes, but the number is very minuscule. And most importantly, this narrative that, it's because of the benevolence of the British that we got all these things. I think I have done some research over here, which I have published through my book, through which we can show that I'm talking about the colonial period at that point of time and the company period at that point of time, the nascent colonial years and the company years. It is very evident that we fought in a huge manner. People say about Netaji, the Netaji's fight was through force. We have to salute Netaji for the force because the kind of vision and thinking that he had was something different. At that point of time, it was something different. And then people say with regard to Mahatma Gandhi as to how he led a non-violent movement and how, he had this particular thing where he said two things. Number one is with regard to non-violent movement, ahimsa and truth, which is the truth and non-violence are as old as hills. This is the book. If you see in his book, My Experiments in Truth, these two things will be there, which will predominant in his book, which is that...
That's the recurrent themes that you have.
Exactly. Yeah. So, this particular theme of non-violence and truth, something of this sort, of this magnitude which has happened in Madras, systematically has been erased. Probably people didn't want to show him because they were fearful of a reprisal as to what will happen to their political mileage or whatever it is, I don't know. But one can see that there is an ecosystem which has been in force. So all that I'm saying is that there has been a systematic effort to ensure that this particular person's existence, the person's existence has not been there in any of our memories. Because if you see that point of time, there was no radio, there was no telegraph, there was no electricity. There was nothing. There was no mass transportation. There was no railways. There was absolutely nothing. And to have achieved this to this magnitude, going up to the British Parliament and winning in our own Parliament is a huge thing for us. Winning for us to get our own laws in the State Assembly, it's a huge thing for us. To imagine for a moment that an Indian would go, he's a native Indian at the end of the day.
We celebrate it even today.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So when he goes to Great Britain, when his ideas go to Great Britain, and when that particular thing pertaining to torture, how he won in Great Britain, in the House of Commons. And this is not something which is an ordinary thing. So this is being completely kept in the dark, like how His Excellency the Governor had said during the book launch function. It is a systematic effort to have a blackout as to the existence of this person.
So, and what role do you think Lakshmi Narasu Chetty had in development of Indian press? Especially, you've acclaimed him as like the father of the Indian printing and newspaper industry. And do you think your book also contributes to the understanding of, getting back to our roots of modern Indian media and the ongoing struggles of the press freedom and other things?
No, my book's title is, if you can see, it is called as the First Native Voice of Madras. There is the reason why we have kept this name. At that point of time, anybody who is associated with the press, they will know very well that the first newspaper which was in India was by Augustus Hickey. It was called as the Hickey's Gazette, which came in Calcutta. Over here in Madras, we had something called as the Madras Courier. After that, we had Athenaeum, the Spectator, and the Madras Record, and few other newspapers which was in existence at that point of time. These were in circulation then, and these had printing presses. Like you had the Gans brothers and all those people over here. And these were all owned. If you see the one common factor between the Hickey's Gazette in Calcutta to the Madras Gazette, which was printed by the government, and also these other newspapers that I just mentioned, they were all owned by British people. Right. And they were all owned for a particular cause.
And that's why it was mostly in Calcutta. Yeah.
It's Calcutta. And even over here, we had a very few papers over here. We had 4 to 5 papers over here. Those papers also, they were all owned by the British. And we were not allowed to own even a printing press. That is how the apartheid was. And if you need to own a printing press, you need to have a considerable amount of knowledge, first of all, at that point of time, as to what the printing press really did. First of all, you need to have the money, you need to have the material resources to have a printing press, and to
we know how Subramanya Bharati also strived.
Exactly. So imagine this for a moment. In 1844, if I'm not wrong, that is the time when for the first time a printing press is being established in number 13 Armenian Street. That printing press is called as Hindu in number 13 Armenian Street by GAZULU Lakshmi Narasu Chetty. From the research, from what we can see, it's now quite clear, very clear, that he was the first native Indian to have owned a printing press. And he is the first native Indian to have started an English newspaper called as the Madras Crescent newspaper. And if you can see, if I can just highlight a few things which we have in a book, which we have taken through the Right to Information Act for the first time. We're bringing it out after independence for the first time for the public at large. In March 1848, just imagine this, 100 years before our independence, there is a letter which is sent from Mr. C.P. Brown, who was the Postmaster General. He sends this letter to the Chief Secretary, in which there is a list of all those, newspapers and the circulation of all these newspapers. Now, in that, if you can see, Madras Crescent name is there, and next in that table, if you see, Madras Crescent newspapers circulation is 10,500.
Back then.
I'm talking about approximately 100 years before independence,
True.
which is in 1848. Now, just imagine for a moment, if you have to have 10,500 subscribers as a native Indian, and at that point of time, you know how the British were against us. It was a company rule, nevertheless, but how the British were against us, we all know. The oppression that they had against us, we all know. Despite all these things, to have this at that point of time, and I can tell one more thing from the information what we had. He also had another newspaper called as the Carnatic and Madras Telegraph Exchange Gazette. Now, this information is not available in public domain. I brought it through a book for the first time. So, when the telegraph was introduced subsequently, he brought out a newspaper called the Carnatic and Madras Telegraph Exchange Gazette at number 13 Armenian Street, which was the printing hub for this particular thing. And staying with printing, he not only printed newspapers, the Madras Crescent alone he did not print. He printed a lot of other things. Like, for example, he printed a lot of works in Telugu literature, right? And he also printed a lot of other works. And essentially, this printing press was there to fight, or to say, to be the voice for the native Indians. Because till then, we native Indians did not have a voice to put forth our grievances in the public forum and the public domain. Before the British authorities, we did not have any sort of mechanism to do so. He established a platform for the first time. GAZULU LAKSHMI Narsulu Chetty, for the first time upon the establishment of that newspaper and the printing press, he established it for the first time. And it was not a failure, because it was a huge success. To have 10,500 at that point of time.
It's definitely a
huge success.
Break, probably.
Exactly. So, to achieve this is not an easy task. So, it's a monumental task. And if you see what the British did to him, because he was a merchant and he inherited his father's legacy of being one of the richest people in Madras at that point in time, because his father was called as Sidulu Chetty, and he had a company called Sidulu Chetty and Sons. He inherited the cotton business, the cloth business from his father. And, at that point of time, he had the editors of the newspapers. They were all British people. Yeah, they were not Indians.
So, Indian appointing Britishers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he had his longest serving editor, if I'm not wrong, is Harvey Dexter, and he had editors like Mackenzie, like William, and all those people, which we can see from the almanac which we have taken from the Kanimera library. So you have an Indian who owned a newspaper in English, having about 10,500 subscribers way back in 1848. That is the evidence what we have, and he employed British people. Just imagine the amount of paperwork that would have gone. And the subscription rate at that point of time per month was 2 rupees, which is not an ordinary thing. And he had subscribers which was 10,500. So that goes on to show how it was at that point of time. And the Madras Crescent, to its credit, was a wonderful newspaper. We have had we came to know of all these things because there is something called as the British National Archives. In the website, if you see, you have other British newspapers based in London. Like, for example, you have the Hobart Courier based in Hobart in Australia. They were referring to the news items which were carried in the Madras Crescent newspaper in 1850s and in late 1840s, in 1849 and 1851. These newspapers which were abroad, like, for example, you have the Huddersfield Chronicle, you have the Morning Star in London, you have other newspapers. They show that the Madras Crescent had said this, the Madras Crescent had said that. They quoted and they cited the Madras Crescent in London and in Australia. And the Hong Kong and China Overseas Mail, which was there at that point of time, regularly used to quote what the Madras Crescent had said. That is how famous and that is how credible the Madras Crescent was, thanks to the able editorship of that person called Harley, who was identified and who was employed by GAZULU LAKSHMI Narsulu Chetty. Yes. And that is why he used to be called as the first native voice of Madras.
So to move on, What were some of the key challenges or obstacles? Because like we said, it is just not an easy task of whatever he has done. He should have definitely faced a lot of resistance, when it comes to proselytization or oppressive taxation. So what are your inputs on them?
Yeah, from what we can see from the research what we have done, I'm not saying something on my own imagination here. From the research what we have done, look, in 1849, I'll first start with the aspect of newspaper. Now, at that point of time, he had this newspaper called Madras Crescent, which was the voice of the natives, which was against the British. Every other newspaper in Madras was a British-owned, a British-backed newspaper, which was the voice of the British. This was the only newspaper which was against the British. And if
still had a lot of subscriptions.
Exactly. Now, certainly, if you see, the British would not like this. So, what happened was, he was far ahead of his time in investigative journalism. What he did was, he had a person called Venkatacharilu Naidu, who was a Telugu translator in the Telugu translation department of the Home and Political Department in Fort St. George in Madras. Now, whenever the East India Company's Council in Madras meets, they will write down something called as minutes. All right? It's natural. Those minutes have to be translated into Telugu, mandatorily. And the person who would do that would be Venkatacharilu Naidu. Now, every time a minute is being done in Fort St. George by the powers that be at that point of time, it used to be translated by Venkatacharilu Naidu, and a copy of that used to be made by him and sent to GAZULU LAKSHMI CHETTY and to Harvey to print in the Madras Crescent. No, the British themselves, they did not know, because their minutes get published in their own gazette one day later. And it gets published in the Madras Crescent one day earlier. How did this happen is something, they were really baffled.
We can't do it even today.
Exactly. This didn't happen for one occasion. Okay, this happened continuously for more than about 3 months. The British were not able to find out what happened. They knew that somebody was there within Fort St. George, that somebody was doing something, but they didn't know who. So there was a person by name Samuel Bowie. He was the person who was working with the newspaper called as the Madras Record newspaper. And later on with some other newspapers, some other British newspapers. He asked for a job with
Madras Crescent.
Yes, and he refused. When he refused the job, he wanted to take revenge on GAZULU LAKSHMI CHETTY. So somehow he came to know this particular thing was happening through Venkatacharilu Naidu. So from what we can see from the information what we have taken from the archives, first time probably in history of Madras Presidency, Venkatacharilu Naidu was under investigation and under inquiry for doing investigative journalism. And for giving all the materials to Madras Crescent. And there was an inquiry which was conducted. Summarily, all the people who were involved in that particular thing, they were all dismissed. And Venkatacharilu Naidu was dismissed. Now, the entire set of inquiry which took place in 1848 and 1849, that copy we have taken from the Right to Information Act and we have kept in the book. So we have all those copies over here. Now, incidentally, the trigger which made them get caught was that they published a particular news item in Madras Crescent. Now, we don't have copy of the news item, but we do have the copy of the summary dismissal of Venkatacharilu Naidu, because it was a government order which ensured that they got dismissed. In that, interestingly, they say that there was a government order which was to be created and to be published, which ensured that the Devasthanam funds, the Pakoda funds, that is the funds of the temple and the lands of the temple, will be used by the government for other purposes. Now, this is what the British was planning to do in 1848. And now we have this particular information through the Right to Information Act, which we have published in this book. Probably he must have lied to GAZULU, or whether it is true or not, we don't have a copy of that. But we do have a sentence which is mentioned over there in the summary dismissal of Venkatacharilu Naidu, because they take evidence, and they have given documentary evidence, and they've also taken witnesses of Venkatacharilu Naidu. In that he says this particular thing.
Okay. So how did NARASU Chetty, had that vigor or to fight back?
Now, what happened was the basic necessities, which is there for a newspaper to exist at that point of time, was through advertisements. The government will give advertisements. That basic courtesy was also not given to the Madras Crescent. In the British community, news was spread to treat this particular paper as a pariah, which means that you should treat this newspaper as something not serious, because this is constantly lamenting about the lives and about the situation of the native Indians in Madras. All right. So the British were not happy with what he was doing. Constantly, number 13 Albanian Street was under police surveillance. But they could not ignore this person because at that point of time, he was one of the richest merchants in Madras.
Who has also got to supply business to.
Yes, to the British East India Company. And if you can see, he was the director of Monaco Chowdhury, along with Captain Christopher Biden of Madras. He was the director of various other companies, and he had ties with Manchester. That is GAZULU, LAKSHMI, NARASU Chetty and Sidulu Chetty. They had ties, cotton ties with Manchester. So if you are going to do something against him, you will have international repercussions on trade. That is what we could see. So the Marquis of Tweedledale government, who was the governor at that point of time, they had no other choice but to back down on certain things for which GAZULU fought. An example was that, if you can just say that, on 11th of November 1839, all right, 70,000 people had converged here in Madras, and they had put up a petition. It is called as the First Native Education Petition. Now, it had three things. Number one, it said that we need a concept of religious neutrality, that the British will not interfere in our religion, and you will not force us to, convert or do proselytization of our religion. Point number two, we will have our own right of having our own educational system in India, especially in Madras. And point number three, emancipation of education. At that point of time, there were a lot of conditions. If you need to learn English, you need to be proficient in the religion of Christ. If you need to get a BA or something, you need to be proficient in Bible. And it went on to an extent in which in 1846, the British government at that point of time, in cahoots with the British Christian missionaries at that point of time. I'm not blaming the Indian Christian missionaries. We are a secular nation now, and we have to respect all the Christian brothers right here, right now, who are the Indian Christians over here, who are one of the patriotic people in our country. But having said that, you have the British Christian missionaries at that point of time, where they had a very good ecosystem developed. They ensured that Bible was to be made as a mandatory curriculum in all the government and government aided schools. Now, there was a massive protest which was there. This happened in 1846. In 1839, what happened was this mass education petition was there. This 70,000 people had signed. As a result of the 1839 petition only, we have something called as the Madras University, which we have here. Tomorrow, if somebody is going to say that Madras University is there because of the benevolence of the British, they are wrong. We have documentary evidence over here because there are two things which we have shown as documentary evidence. Number one is the inaugural thanks address of Lord Elphinstone, who was the governor at that point of time, who was responsible for inaugurating the Madras University at that point of time in 1841. Number two, we have the scroll petition. It was signed, 70,000 people had signed in a scroll.
That itself needs a lot of grit.
Exactly. And this scroll is right now available in St. Pancras room, reading room in London, in the British Library. We have kept the photos of that also. This was sent to me through email through a person by name Scott Connors, and through help from British Library, we were able to get this information. So the existence of that particular scroll and the existence of that particular petition is true, which we have shown as a documentary evidence over here. And what happened as the existence of that petition was, as a result of that petition which was given to the British, was that the governor at that point of time, Lord Elphinstone, had responded by the creation of the Madras University. Not only that, there was another important thing that happened, which was the will of Pachaipa till then had not been probated effectively. Till then it was probated, but it was not probated effectively. So there was a huge pressure against the British to ensure that the will of Pachaipa sees its day, because at that point of time, the only institution or the only organization which had so much of funds and lands to give education to the native people was as a result of the will of Pachaipa Modalayar at the point of time. So the first native education institution in an organized manner to teach English was the Pachaipa institution, which was established at the point of time. And in 1842, it started by having its school over here in Esplanade. Of course, it had its schools in Kanchipuram. Then there was an edifice which was created, which was there in the 1840s, all right, which we see next to the, I think, King George statue, which is there right now in Paris. If you can see, if you just cross the Madras Law College and go straight to your right hand side, you can see the Pachaipa school. That was there at that point of time, and that was a huge institution at that point of time, which at that point of time was a beacon of hope for the native students. And it had British professors, it had British principals, and it was one of the most advanced schools at that point of time. And it's not a joke to have such British professors at that point of time. It was completely independent. And GAZULU Lakshmi Narasu Chetty was one of the trustees. As long as he died in 1868 in September 6th, he was the trustee of Pachepa College and Pachepa Charities and the Pachepa High School at that point of time. The reason why I am saying this is that we have this narrative that it was because of the benevolence of the British that education was given to us over here. And as a result of that only we have English and all those things. It is all nonsense, which we have shown through our documentary evidence. We fought for our rights. It was we as the citizens, as natives at that point of time. We fought for our rights, and it is through our fight in a non-violent, participatory, democratic manner. Like for example, the petition which we had given. As a result of that only, we have achieved so much. We have achieved the Madras University only as a result of that. Another interesting aspect is that over here we had this particular superimposition of Bible, a mandatory superimposition of Bible in the government aided school by the British Christian missionaries at a point of time. Now, a very interesting thing happened. Outside Pachepas, we have kept the memorial also. The entire memorial which was there by GAZULU Lakshmi Narasu Chetty, he was the chairman of that particular, that protest which took place, where 12,000 people had signed. All right. And that memorial is very clear as to what all the atrocities, once you go through the memorial, you will know what all the atrocities the British had done against us. And it was as a result of that, there was a person by name Henry Chamiers. We do have the Chamiers Road over here. So John Chamiers was the Chief Secretary of Madras. He had a son called Henry Chamiers over here. And he gave not one, not two, but he gave 3 dissenting minutes against the then governor, who was Marquis of Tweedledale at that point of time. We have kept all the 3 minutes through RTI, which we have taken from the archives, which we have kept over here. These 3 dissenting minutes prove that the conspiracy of the British at that point of time was thwarted only because of a vigilant person
who also had the vision
to stop this in GAZULU Lakshmi Narasu Chetty. And you had a British person called Henry Chamiers who was there, who agreed with what GAZULU Lakshmi Narasu Chetty did at that point of time. And it was monumental. The success was decisive and it was monumental. It was huge. Never have we seen the British government at its peak, at the zenith of its power, to withdraw from a particular decision. They did that in 1840s. In the late
really innovative back then.
Exactly. They did that in the late 1840s. They did that because of the massive protest which took place outside Pachepas in 1846. Pachepas is not in Chetty. I'm talking about the Pachepas in the Esplanade at that point of time. And that was because of that one person called GAZULU Lakshmi Narasu Chetty. And that is why in the book, if you see, we have kept the background as the Pachepa school, and we have also kept his signature as chairman, which we have taken from the archives through the Right to Information Act.
When you're talking about, the complexities of working within the British system, like how you said a few points right now, that is not an easy task. How it was possible for Lakshmi Narasu Chetty to even advocate for Indian rights and their interests being among the British system.
This person had a foresight. I think the political acumen that he had, that point of time in India, I think nobody had at that point of time. Because on 26th of February in 1852, we have taken this from the Pharaoh's Gazette. If you can see, based upon the British Indian Association, which was formed in Calcutta, he formed his own association called the Madras Native Association. And it was this particular idea, to have mouthpiece like the Crescent, which will advocate for the voice for the native Indians. And you will have a newspaper arm on one side and you will have the political arm on the other side through Madras Native Association. So this particular idea, this basic concept which was there at that point of time in 1852, this man had, which is something far ahead of his time. Even today, certain political parties don't have such ideas. And to have your own mouthpiece and then to have your own organization to fight for you. He had an agent called Justice Malcolm Lewin, who was based in London. Those days you need to have political agents to voice your concerns to the British. So that Malcolm Lewin had written about what atrocities British did over here. And he was a judge of Trinelveli over here in Madras who resigned in protest to the actions of the British government, and he went over there to Great Britain. So he employed him and he was the agent for the Madras Native Association. He had written 2 books on how to reclaim India. These were the books that what Malcolm Lewin has written. I've said that in my book also. Now, at that point of time, in 1852, the association that he started, called Madras Native Association, had members starting from Vengurla in Karnataka on this side, Bellary in Karnataka, and on this side, if you see, you have Rajamundri and you have in Andhra and you have other things, all the way from Ganjam in Odisha to down south to Kanyakumari and to the Malabar coast. And he had subscribers which was beyond 10,000. Imagine for a moment to have subscribers for your newspapers which was beyond 10,000.
So not just in Tamil
Exactly.
Nadu.
So the newspaper subscribers is one aspect of it. The political subscribers is a totally different aspect of it. He had beyond 10,000 people at that point of time. To give you an example, they will have regular meetings in their own spaces, that is in their own areas. They had a president, a vice president, a treasurer, a proper established political system at that point of time. They would pass resolutions and then they will send it to the headquarters here in Madras. That will be published in the Madras Crescent, and then they will ask, because the governor at that point of time was placed over here in Madras. So using that in number 13 Armenian Street, they would then request the governor. The government didn't listen to that at that point of time. The Madras governor didn't listen. They will forward it to the Governor General in Calcutta. Even if they play as the deaf and dumb, he would then forward it to his political agent in London. And he would then ensure that he gets in touch with the Member of Parliament in Great Britain, who would raise it in the British Parliament. That is how it happened. And this was the well-oiled mechanism which was there at that point of time.
This is truly the silent revolution.
Exactly. This happened in 1852. You can just imagine this for a moment. This happened in 1852. And this is not an ordinary thing to have this kind of vision and foresight in 1852 when you didn't have even electricity in your house.
Yeah, it's very difficult to conglomerate such a huge...
Yes, this has happened in 1852. And from the documents, what we can see from the House of Commons, from the debates which we have taken from the British Parliament, which we have published in our book, he has spearheaded a huge mass movement in which people fought for the emancipation of their own rights. We call something called a civil society, our own civil society, all those things we call. This was in 1852, and this was before the American Civil War. And this was something which was far ahead of his time. And if you can see what all has happened, the deliverance of what all has happened, I would state that he is to be iconic hero for all those people who want to get their work done in proper, democratic, non-violent, systematic manner.
So unfortunate that we've,
systematically,
not got even
exactly.
a small
Yes.
Lessons on our
Yes.
textbooks.
And it is not available, sorry to interrupt over here, from what I have checked with the history books over here, it is not available in any history book. What this person has done, it's not available in any history book. I sincerely hope that in some place in our history books, this person's legacy is there in some place in our history books, because what he has done, our future generations should know.
Truly. This Amrit Kal has already ignited that fire in us, and I'm sure we will have more unsung heroes,
Exactly.
And sir, you've been telling us about that Madras Native Association and how LAKSHMI NARASU CHETTY was a key figure in that association. Can you elaborate more on the significance of this organization and its impact on politics especially?
Yeah, because we are celebrating him as a freedom fighter. It is but right that I have to say as to what he did for our freedom, because tomorrow they will say he did something for education. How can you bring an education philanthropist as a freedom fighter? One has to understand a very important factor over here. In 1852, an organization called Madras Native Association was formed. It was spearheaded by GAZULU Lakshmi Narsulu Chetty. At that point of time, we had a very important, wrong, evil design of the British being implemented over here in Madras Presidency. That was for the implementation of torture for collection of tax. I don't know how many of them know this over here. There was something called a torture which was employed by the British government officials, including the native officials who were complicit with the British white officials because they wanted to please their English masters. Now, as a result of you to give tax or revenue to the British, if you are supposed to give that revenue what they ask for. If you don't do that, you will be tortured. It is inhuman. Many people have died. It's brutal. We can't say it out. What all happened, we can't say it in public domain. It's better for the people to read it in the book. And it was colossal. The kind of inhuman, brutal torture which was done by the British to collect revenue was insane. What Chetty did was, he sent memorandums after memorandums to Great Britain. There was a person by name Henry Danby Seymour who was a member of parliament of the full constituency in Great Britain. I think he was part of the Tories, the Conservative Party. He came in late 1852 to Madras to see and to have a first-hand account as to what happened over here. He was hosted by GAZULU and he was taken the tour of Madras Presidency. He then went back to London. This was raised in the British Parliament. This came as headlines in all the British newspapers. I've kept those news which came in the British newspapers. I've kept that in my book. At that point of time, in 1852 to 1855, you can say, this was the period when, at about that point of time in Great Britain, debates were taking place vociferously. And it was at that point of time that there were a large number of people who did not want British government's name to be, tainted and be associated with this kind of thing. And at that point of time, Henry Danby Seymour, the Earl of Ellenborough, the Earl of Albemarle, and a few other British people, like for example Mr. Blackett, they raised this issue in the British Parliament. When they raised this issue in the British Parliament, initially they all said no, that we have never heard of torture anywhere in India, and it's not true, it's all lies. This was again raised because series of memorandums were sent, signed by thousands and tens and thousands of people from Madras. It was sent. That was when Henry Danby Seymour paid a visit to Madras, and then he went back over there and he raised this as a huge issue in the British Parliament. When this was raised in the House of Commons as a huge issue, what everybody decided was at that point of time, we will put to vote. And it was put to vote under the synonym called as land tenure in Madras. Now the House was divided. You will be surprised to know that on this particular issue, to vote for a commission to look into this issue, the House was divided. Okay. We have taken
so
those.
You still have supporters for that?
Yes, and you had supporters. You can even think for a moment that you had supporters that you can have torture and you can extract tax. And this was there in 1854, and we have kept the voting which took place at that point of time, which came in various newspapers in Great Britain and in Ireland. We have taken those copies and we have kept it as part of our book research. Point number 2, at the end of the day, the British government did respond, and we did have something called, for the first time in the history of India, from what I can see, is something called the Torture Commission. And this was called as the Royal Commission on Torture. There was 3 people who were
boldly declaring,
yeah. And we had this commission to inquire into what all happened over here. So this was established in Madras. They called for public hearing. They called for evidences. They called for witnesses. It was like a sea of afflicted. The white man was finally giving his lending ear to our problems of what our, normal native people were thinking at that point of time. And it was like a sea of afflicted who poured in. Thousands of people gave petitions at that point of time. All right. And the commission was headed by people like John Bruce Norton. Commission was headed by people like Sir Walter Elliot and few other people. And John Bruce Norton played a pivotal role in ensuring that these things were documented properly. And he then got the commission then got all this information. They prepared a report. They prepared a recommendation. They recommended 3 things. It is on record even now. Number 1 is for dehyphenation of the police and the revenue. Number 2 is for the eradication of torture to be imposed as a method to collect revenue and to collect tax. And number 3 is to make sure those people who are responsible for the collection of torture, they are brought to book according with law as per British law. These things had gone to the House of Commons and it was implemented. Now this was possible only because of one person, that was GAZULU Lakshmi Narsulu Chetty, and his unwavering patriotism and his affection towards his own people. Point number 3, which I would like to state over here, is about a person called John Bruce Norton. He was because I come from a legal background. He was a person who was the founder of the Madras Bar Association. All right, GAZULU Lakshmi Narsulu Chetty was the founder of the Madras Native Association. So John Bruce Norton was the Advocate General of Madras High Court at that point of time, and he was the founder of the Madras Bar Association. And at that point of time in 1860s, after the First War of Independence, when GAZULU died on 6th of September in 1868, his memorial was held in Pachepa Hall. The memorial was led by John Bruce Norton. And if you see the speech which John Bruce Norton has given, which I have kept as part of the research work in my book, any human being will be brought down to tears. The manner in which this man has fought, he lost most of his wealth for this particular cause of his native men, to give better quality of dignity for his native men. This particular thing, this particular chapter in history has been eradicated from our memory. What happened subsequently is a little bit interesting. In 1881, we have Mr. Basham Iyengar, who was the first Native Advocate General of the Madras High Court, being the president, reviving the Madras Native Association. The secretary was Tanjavur Dikshitar Ganapati Subramanya Iyer, who was the founder of the Hindu newspaper as we know it. He was the secretary of the Madras Native Association, and they revived the Madras Native Association in 1881. They had the same ideals as that of GAZULU Lakshmi Narsulu Chetty, and they wanted this particular organization to continue. It then metamorphosed into something called as what we know as the Madras Mahajana Sabha, because if you see the centenary release of the Madras Mahajana Sabha, it states so. And you had Early Norton, who was the son of John Bruce Norton, who was also a part of this organization. This Madras Mahajana Sabha, a few enlightened members of this Madras Mahajana Sabha had joined in the first conference during the formation of the Indian National Congress. That's how it is.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm sure you have lots more to say.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
This interview, I'm pretty sure, is very much educative. And your spontaneity with the subject shows your expertise and as much also on the veracity of the information that you have been providing with us. Thank you so much for your time. And we really thankful to you, because one has to know about this iconic person who's contributed so much, and I'm sure we need to learn more, and I think sooner your book should be part of the curriculum, and I wish a lot of students get to know about this iconic figure. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much for having me in All India Radio, ma'am. And I would like to wish all the viewers of All India Radio a very happy 77th Independence Day. We should be proud of the fact that we are all Indians, and we should be proud of the fact that we had freedom fighters like GAZULU, LAKSHMI, NARASU, CHETTY. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.
You just heard the interview with Shri B. Jagannath, advocate and author of the first native voice of Madras, Lakshmi Narasu Chetty. And until we meet again, this is Rajarajeshwari signing off and bidding goodbye to all our listeners. And this program came to you from the studios of Akashwani, Chennai.